Well, Wakatankaga had many problems. He had many experiences with the feathered friend, the furry ones, and even those that walked on two legs, which were the Ho-Chunks, the Winnebagos. And somehow he's always had to be on a go, and he had been somewhere and coming home or just wandering around when all of a sudden he heard someone singing. As he journeyed on his way, he heard this little song out here on the side of the path somewhere, and he stopped, and he's kind of an arrogant fellow too, and he said, "Who dares to sing in my presence?" He said, "Right here on my back." He said, "I got a bundle of songs that are my making, and I am the best singer in the land." He said, "How dare you sing in my presence? You keep silent." Like the stories go, this 4 times is going to happen. A little something out there sang that song again. And Wakatankaga once more again said, "Silence, how dare you?" But the little voice come back and sang it the 3rd time. And this time the words that was of the song, Wakatankaga heard it. And the song said something, it was a warning. It said, "Whoever shall eat me shall defecate, shall defecate, shall defecate." What a title. And again, Wakatankaga told him to keep his peace, keep silent, because he was the one that was the best singer of all the land, and no one should raise their voice while in his presence. And once more, the 4th time, this is a warning. "Anyone shall eat me shall defecate, shall defecate, shall defecate." There's a little tune to that, but I will, for a long time we haven't had the right kind of music, so we're not going to sing it. But anyhow, that's the words. You're in for trouble if you eat me. Otherwise, you little guys, that would mean that you're going to have an awful tummy ache, so you better lay off, bub. So this kind of angered Wakatankaga, so he looked once more amongst the grass and so forth along the side of the road, and he didn't know exactly which. "Well, whoever you are," he said, "to eat you, you tell me not to eat you? I can eat anything and get by with it." So he reached out there and he grabbed around there, and in this bunch of grass that he pulled up was a little weed there, and it had a little bulb on it. Now, you'll find them standing here and there sometimes. It might be just one type of weed, but the stalk has a little bulb on it. Well, that's what he ate. "I'll show that so-and-so," he said, "that he can't threaten me." So then he went on his merry way down the path, and he got quite a ways down there, and he had to let out some wind, which went poof. And so he did. This was just the beginning, and Wakatankaga thought, "Well, that's what that guy was singing about, huh?" He said, "That's nothing." He walked a little bit further, and here 2 puffs of air come out of him. pooh. And oh, he said, that's what he's talking about. So he sang a whole song for that. And as he walked along, well, he got a little bit worse. So this now the number of puffs, poops coming out of him was a little bit increased. And so finally he said, hey, this guy wasn't kidding. He'd even blow him up off the ground when he'd let one go. Ah, this is something, he said. Well, I'll outsmart him, he said. So he went into a little grove of trees, little small trees. Today we call them hazelnut trees. So he sat down on the ground. He's not going to be blown up off the ground like it was. It's getting something terrible. So he sat down on the ground and he grabbed hold of these little trees. And of course, when he began to really let off air, why, it's like a machine gun. And he just boom, 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 boom. And what the trees that he was hanging on to, he began to loosen the roots all up. Right there and then, my friends, from that day on to this day, you go out into the woods and you find some hazelnut trees out there, little brush shrubs. Their roots don't go deep anymore. Well, that was due to him hanging on to those things and shaking them up out of the ground. He broke the deep roots, so now today, hazel trees don't have deep penetrating roots. They run along the top of the ground. They claim that Wachunkaga was the cause of that by trying to hang on to him, hold himself down in trying to solve his problem about staying on the ground instead of levitating every time he let out some air. So now this went on, and finally he did really develop a terrific stomach ache. And it got so bad that he thought, he's got a bowel movement coming. And so, which he had to do, when nature calls, you must go. Yes, sir, you got to go when she calls. So that's what happened, just the beginning. But he moved around. He defecated quite a bit there. It seemed like he hadn't had anything to eat for some time, but still, he had enough in him that he could really pile it up. So he kept moving around, got on top of a log, and still the pile kept coming up, got too close to him, so wherever he squatted, he finally climbed a little tree with a branch out there, and he sat up on the branch, and there it stacked it clear up. Must have been careless. He got some on the branch, and he stepped in it and slipped off and fell down into the old goo. Oh, that one must have been a mess, I assure you. So I imagine he took his fingers but at the same time it got into his eyes, and he couldn't see. It blinded him. Oh boy, where is there water? So he began to walk blindly along, and he come to a tree. Say, hey, brother, who are you? Which one are you? Well, I'm the sturdy oak that stands on the hillside. Which way is the water? Well, just follow the incline down the hill, and you'll finally get there. So I'm sorry I can't lead you there. I'm supposed to stand right here and keep this place where I stand. So I'll wander on down the hill. So Wachunkaga goes down, feeling around. Reaches another tree now. Oh, who are you, brother? Well, I'm Slippery Alum. Now, where's the water at? Well, just keep on going down the hill, on the incline. Come to another tree. Who are you? I'm Hickory, and so forth. Finally, he got down there, got hold of a big tree, and he said, now, who are you, brother? I'm Rock Alum. Now, where's the water? Well, they keep a going until he come to the willow tree. who stood on the bank of the water. Well, you brother, I am the willow that stands on the bank of the river. Where is the water? He said, all you have to do is take a step. And so he stepped and fell in the water. And there, he washed himself, cleaned himself up. And so this is what happened to him. With fair warning, he was told what that little guy was going to do, or what would be the result of someone eating him. He did not have to eat him. So the story here is, don't do what they tell you you can't do, or even hint that use your head and you save yourself falling into some bad mess. So he crawls out on the bank, he wrings his coonskin garment out or blanket out and spreads it out to dry, and the rest of his garments he sort of laid down on the bank there with his head, I imagine, laying something about like this, looking out there into the water, and finally he looked down. Oh boy, a whole bunch of plums down there in the water. Well, as soon as he saw something to eat, he forgot his immediately past experience. He dove in the water, and he went down there trying to get those plums. He'd come back up, and he'd lay there and look, and sure enough, they're still there. So he kept going down there and almost drowned himself trying to find those plums, and he come laid, oh, phooey, he said, turned over on his back and laid there and looked up here, and right next to this willow tree stood a great big plum tree, and here the plums were up here. He said, that's it. He said, I just can't help myself. No wonder they called me the foolish one. So we see him now picking plums. At the fall of the year, I guess, so he's picking plums, and he took his coonskin blanket and sort of made a basket out of it and carrying a bunch of plums and walking along eating plums, spitting out the pits. And he come to a lodge, and here there were 2 she-bear living there with their cubs. There were 3 cubs there. There were 2 big she-bear living, and he comes along, and he'd sow some plums up on top of the lodge where the smoke hole was, so the plums dropped down inside, and oh my, there's some plums falling from the sky. So he threw plums in there, sort of teasing them a while, and finally they came outside, and they said, oh, there you are. You're the one that's got them. Where did you get all them plums? So it was a late afternoon, and so he turns to the west. He said, do you see all that red over there along those hills, that top of the hill? It's kind of red. Yes. He said, well, those all plums, nice, ripe plums. Oh, my. I suppose they said, it's too bad we don't have a babysitter to sit our babies so we could go pick some plums and maybe dry some for winter. Well, this was in the time when the animals spoke to human beings, I guess, in the same Winnebago language before they got confused. So they're speaking about this while and Wakchankaga seeing those nice fat cubs there. Why, I'll be glad to babysit for you. So they thanked him, and he's going to take care of the cubs, and away they went to the west. over the hills to get over that to that great big plum field that they were looking. It was just about sundown, but that's all red. So as soon as they departed for the plums, why, he set about to fix himself a nice meal. I told you he had a big appetite. So what he did was he had these 3 cubs for his evening meal. And so in those days, it seems like the Winnebago, I don't know whether they got it from him or what. They had a method in wartime to leave their calling cards. And what they used to do, it's very gruesome, was to behead the child and put sticks in its mouth and twist its little face up to look like it was smiling. And then they put the head on a stake and set it in a doorway so that the parent was returning home, if he happened to be absent, would look at the doorway and see his child smiling at him. Then later on you find out that the child had been beheaded. But that was a calling card of the Winnebagos in warfare. And so this is what he did, and he went to sleep. He rose early in the morning, and there happened to be a badger coming along there, and a little mother, he says. That's just kind of a change in the thing. They were all brothers, but it was a she badger, so he calls it little mother or sister or something, and then little mother, and sometimes he'd even call it aunt. So he can talk this creature in doing his bidding. He said, "Will you dig me a hole?" He said, "Start right here and go into this hill and go all the way up to the top and come out up there on top of the hill." Oh, he said, "I think you're the most beautiful of all the digging animals." So this pleased the badger, and so she went and began to dig a hole there. In no time, he said, "Dig it just a little bit bigger, will you?" So she came back and dug the hole a little bit bigger, and so she made this thing all the way up to the top of the hill and then came out up there. In the meantime, the mother bears were coming back. They didn't find any plums. That happened to be the sunset going down there that he was talking about, and somehow or another the animals always took stock in what he was saying, and there happened to be 2 of them that was just didn't quite know the score, I guess, so they thought, they believed him that was a bunch of ripe plums over there. And they were angry. They came back, and of course he had this little bear sitting at the door and peeking out of the lodge door. And so here they came back, and they seen it was just the head. The rest of them, the bones was laying around there. Well, they got very angry, and they seen him by this hill. There's that wretched child killer, they said, and we'll tear him to pieces, and they chased him. So he crawls into this hole that the badger dug, and he crawls on up. They could not both crawl in there at the same time. He comes out of the hole on top of the hill, and he comes back around this way and changes his disguised himself, and he said, "What are my sisters doing?" And they looked at him and didn't recognize him, and he said, "Why are you weeping, and why are you so angry?" "Well, Wakachankaga was here and told us that yesterday afternoon that was all red plums over there, nice ripe plums. And we didn't have a babysitter, and he babysat for us, and we went to get the plums. And that was a red sundown. And when we got back, why, he had eaten the cubs. So he went in that hole. Say, I believe I did see him go in there. He said, let me go in there after him. So I said, you too can't go in at the same time. I can go in there. So he crawls in there and pretends that he is fighting somebody in that hole, you know. And he come back out, and he said, in the meantime, he said, why don't you start digging this hole just a little bit bigger? Well, so he went back in to fight Wakchankaga again. He's fighting himself in that hole. And so the bears dug out that hole a little bit bigger, and he comes back out. He said, I got him laying in there, but he's a little bit too heavy for me to drag out. He said, both of you go in there and drag him out. So the bears both went in this hole. They had dug it up to a size that they could crawl in this hole, and they went in there. In the meantime, he ran around and got himself some brush and dry wood and so forth, and he plugged up the end of this hole and he set it on fire. Oh, he laughing to himself, I'll have some more bear meat to eat. So by this process, the heat went in this hole, the smoke went in there and suffocated the bears, and all the heat singed their fur off, and so there he was. He had two more bears roasted, you might say, right in that cave. So as it acted like a chimney flue, the smoke came out up on top of the hill, and that made a nice oven. And so there we have again there that he was a very hungry man. I don't know if he knew his own sense of fill or fullness, but this is what he would do. He'd give him a chance to eat something. He just keeps on eating until there ain't any more eating left, but which would also kill a normal person. For what reason that kind of a eating habit is told, I don't know. Maybe we'll find out in the next session. In the next story or two, maybe later on, it'll come out why he is depicted in these stories as a very gluttonous person, a big eater. It's for a purpose, I assure you. The setting of the storytelling or legend telling would be in the home. Of course, this is my personal experience, and I want to put this in there so that you know what our teachings were in the early boyhood training that I experienced. It seemed that when the sun would go down, the word of caution was that it's time to settle down. The day was created for activity. Nighttime was for rest. So when the ruler of the day, which was the sun, would set and nightfall fell, one must come to rest, like most nature, except the night-prowling animals and those insects that traveled at night. So man must abide by these rules. They didn't say little children. But their manner of teaching was that nighttime things, accidents can happen because you don't see so well in the dark, and you might forget that there was a stump in a certain part of a yard, and you're out playing around and you stumble over the stump, might hurt yourself more than just skinning your shins. And in order to enforce that, then they concocted the idea that there were evil spirits that lurked in darkness. And those that disobeyed these rules of coming to rest might face some other consequences if they happen to be around where there were these evil spirits. In a way, that was part of the discipline, or it was the beginning of teaching the individual self-discipline to do that thing which a youngster would say, oh, gee, today, if they said, well, now the sun's set now, no more running around, you can't go out. And of course, we'd have everybody, little tykes would say, oh, gee, Mom, I could see out there, the street light is on. We'd say today, but in those days, we didn't have street lights. And so we would have to come in the house and sit down. And so this gave the elders a chance to put their input in training, educating the young. And so it was done by this method of telling legends, stories, the experiences of other people who have gone on and left the stories or the experiences related to their relatives. And these stories are handed down by the family or a sort of a professional storyteller who enjoyed his job of visiting people in the village, or if it was not a village, you'd say community, because some of the people later on in the Indian life on the reservation began to move further apart. And the onset, when the Winnebagos first came to Nebraska, they lived in little villages. For instance, we have certain names up there on the reservation that denote or tell of someone's village, like in Big Bear Hollow. Chief Big Bear, the head man of the Bear Clan, seemed to have been such a person that people wanted to be around where he moved. So they settled in a hollow there they called the Big Bear Hollow. And another part of that same hollow was sort of shut off by a narrow stone gateway to another hollow, which they called the shut-in town. What I'm talking about shut-in town was that these homes are always locked. It seemed like when you go to visit those places, when they built frame houses, the doors were locked from the inside. You had to knock on the door quite a bit, so the people that go to visit that certain community, when they left, they would wonder why they locked themselves in. And so eventually the name was coined for this community, and they called it the shut-in town. In ancient times, the way to lock your teepee or wigwam up was just to lay a stick across the doorway at the threshold. That was a sign for you to stay out, nobody home, the door is locked. or it's off limits to you. And people abided by that rule, just laying a stick across the doorway. Then we had other communities there that we had to know, because they would say so-and-so came from this village or that village, and we would have to know where these people lived. So then there's another area, and it seemed like one area, which was kind of comical, all the obese people lived. It used to be a dry, well, the lake would dry up in the fall of the year, and they called that Big Belly Town, which, if I say it in Winnebago, it's Nichachate. So if you had a hard time transcribing that, someday I'll have to help out on this. And then we had the Hazikchinak, which was Honey Creek. It seemed that in that area, the most honey was harvested, or more bee trees was found in that area. So it was called the Hazikchinak, which is the bee town or the honey town. And of course, this being in the wooded area, they would say Pajeja, which meant it's where the trees grew in abundance. And those that lived out on the plains, they called that the Oskachida, where it's clear. And so it went that when I tell these stories, they say so-and-so from Hazikchinak. This man came from the honey town, or one came from Shut-In Town, and so there was a gentleman from Big Belly Town that did this and that. So we had to know where these areas were and their names. Now, when the sun went down, I said, now it's time to sit down, quiet. And so it is these times that the stories began. The guy said, oh, gee, that's a raw deal or something. Yet they brought us in here. We could still see a little bit to play. Now we got to sit down, not knowing that this was a form of discipline to get one started in disciplining himself, that he might obey. And so the grandfather or one of the elders, maybe the grandfather's absent, the grandmother's there. Well, she'll start off with, would you like to hear? Wakchankaga or Watehuga, Kechungega, the turtle, the trickster, or the bladder, or about the rabbit, or he who wore men's head for earrings. So in the beginning, well, this was it. The trickster was number one, son of Mauna, which we have had total few stories about. The second one was the turtle. Well, they called him the turtle. So of all these people now, the turtle was a warrior. He thought by coming down, or they sent him down, that he might get rid of the evil spirits that plagued the people. Because he was a warrior, he was going to use war tactics on them. But he also, when he got here, like the first one, the trickster, he looked at the people and saw that there were, his father did a good job on them, you know. They were nice people, and cute, especially the girls. Because throughout the life story of Kechungaga, the turtle, he really thought that he was an answer to all maidens' prayers in himself. He was the ladies' man. Well, you know how boys are. You know, they get a certain age, they don't like girls. Yeah, that's sissy. So I never paid much attention to Kechunga. I wasn't interested in what the girls did. In fact, my grandfather's brother had a daughter that used to beat me in foot races, and so all the sort of her uncles would give me a razzing about being the one who gets beat in a race by women. And, well, I used to try to be as speedy as I can, but some reason or another I never could outrun her. So to this group, I was the one who was beaten by a girl in a foot race. And then we go on to the bladder, who was number 3 of the Mauna's sons. He was named the bladder because he couldn't stand praise. If someone would praise him a little bit, why, he'd start to sort of inflate. He got a little bit bigger in size. Or if he got angry, that's what would happen. He'd start blowing himself up like a football or a basketball. And if you praised him quite a bit, why, he'd get so big he couldn't see anybody but himself, you know. Everybody be hidden. This character, too, you know, it was quite something. You better be quite a ways away from him when he starts letting the air out, because they didn't have air fresheners those days. And it was said when he got through praising him, you better get the heck out of there. Number 4, the man who wore men's heads for earrings. He was a hunter. What he demonstrated was the manner in which man should hunt and sustain life. And so even in the feasts of today, there are sacrifices of buckskin, nice white tan buckskin, which would make some nice gloves and maybe moccasins and gauntlets or whatever you want to call them, these nice fancy kind of cowboy gloves, jackets. They would mark a bow and arrow on that which symbolized the one who was to have this sacrifice, and it either throw it away or hide it in the woods someplace. Now, the interesting part of this character was the fact that he wore these little heads for his earrings. I just stayed just about that far on it. I don't remember too much about what he did. But those heads kind of interested me, so I used to ask Grandmother. I said, were there real heads? And she said, sure enough, there were, because said it has been said that if you got pretty close and sort of got closer to examine those individual heads, said that head would even wink back at you. Or if you held your face in a grotesque manner and came up to examine it, it would make faces at you. They were alive. That was interesting enough, but I never thought too much of that. Then here comes, he didn't get rid of the evil spirits or the big monsters, so then the 5th one comes in the person of the rabbit. Washingega. Now it was he who, being obedient to Mauna, went about and got rid of the monsters and evil spirits on earth. And now the people, due to the influence of the evil that there was supposed to be, had changed their thinking about their relationship with Mauna. And the hair, or the Washingega, came and straightened that out and gave them the medicine lodge in which they would preach to one another about the rules of life as set down by Mauna. And so the part of it is still going on in Wisconsin. Here in Nebraska, it has died out. Now, just in conjunction with Washingega, I don't know if Paul Radin made mention of it, but in the Winnebago world of yesterday or yesteryear, there was no hell. They didn't even have a devil. The philosophy or the thinking was that man brought hell on himself. Man was the one who could be the devil through disobedience. I've heard other places that was number one rule that we call God says today, that if you obey, you're on the right track. But if you disobey, then you are ready for the other place. Winnebagos didn't have the other place, or they didn't have a devil until after the Columbian era, I guess. They got one they called, supposedly the evil spirit of today is the equivalent to Satan or the devil, but they called him Here Skuniga. Here means to be, and Skuni is doubtful that he is. So we have a character today who has been concocted to be the devil and so forth by being called he who is and who is not, or it's doubtful that he is. So this part explains the characters of what we have to deal with in these legends. But my favorite one, like I said before, is Wokchankaga, the clown, the foolish one, the joker. I don't know, maybe you figure it out for yourself why. Maybe I liked it. I'll let you psych me out. And like I said before, this trickster was, well, he's kind of an all-round guy, I figured. He didn't really want to be mean. He'd just have a lot of fun. So after the last story I told about his gluttonous nature and eating 3 bear cubs plus eating 2 big bears, and then he got into this deal with the old buffalo and got him mired down, and then he all of a sudden made his hands fight. So they become separate. He could start calling his hands his brothers. They weren't part of him. And so I did say a little something about one who doesn't obey begins to have other kinds of thinking, and that sort of thinking will lead him to something else and in the wrong direction, or separates him from his purpose and goal in life. Well, after a bit here, why, he was wandering around the country again. He often got in trouble with people for tricking them. And so he was in the Northland by a big body of water and probably resting somewhere there, and he heard the geese coming and the ducks and whatnot, and he looked up into the sky, and here he has the ducks and geese. If you ever went, sat in a blind and watched the birds come in, and some were graceful and some are high divers, fancy divers, and so swooping around in the sky, coming in for a landing, you'd appreciate what I'm talking about. So this is what Wakchankaga was looking at, was watching him come in. And he thought to himself, oh, that must be great to be able to do those things there. Come off from the high up in the sky and swoosh down into a lake. And this time there was quite a number of them, great flocks. So after they were on the lake, and some came ashore in great numbers and were feeding around, quacking and honking at one another and so forth, why, he gets up and he walks out there and he said, well, brothers, he said, I watched you as you came on down from the skies and landed in the lake, in the water. He said, that was pretty graceful, and I just wanted to tell you about it, and I really appreciate what you're doing, how you travel. That must be a lot of fun. I said, where are you going now? What are you all gathering here for? So, oh, we're told we got to get out of this part of the country. We're going to travel because it's going to be cold. There's a great cold coming. So our leader said, and we are now journeying southward. He said, so that's fine. But as he is listening to this duck or a goose telling him this story about why they were moving, he thought to himself, it'd be wonderful if I could go along with him. So he said, I'd like to talk to your leader. You notice I'm not saying the chief. I got a reason for that too. So they took him to the leader of the geese and said, well, brother, I hear you're going south. Yeah. It's time that we should. Every year, every season of this time, we go south. And when seasons change, we come back in the spring. Yes, I know. Yes, I know. But I was just wondering, would it be possible if I could go along with you? Remember, I said that he had been endowed with all kinds of powers, but here he's asking questions now. And so the leader said, well, yes. He said, you could. He said, you can come along with us if you want to. Well, I think that'd be nice. I never did this before. And I think you have a wonderful life. They're flying around, seeing a great country, and coming down into lakes and ponds when you wish. The way you come in is quite graceful. Well, he said, you can do that too. So if you desire to go south with us, that's fine. Well, he said, I know you have already had your fill of buckthorn berries and so forth, and then prepared yourself for the journey. Yeah, that's right. But he said, you can do anything you want. Well, I don't have any feathers. Well, we'll fix that up too if you want feathers. So, the leader of the geese said, our brother here wants to go with us to the Southland where it's nice and warm to get away from this big cold that's coming. But he don't have any feathers. Will you offer him some help? And they all made a great noise, quacking and honking, and said, of course, we'll sacrifice a little feather. What's a little feather? So each one plucked a feather out of himself and offered it to Wakachankaga, and they helped him place them on his body. So now he's dressed up like a Donny Goose. The leaders again said, now, brother, he said, you have to keep your mind on what you want to do. Don't let any distraction get you in bad. Remember, you were going to the Southland, and we got to always think about that. Regardless of what comes, we're heading for the Southland. Oh, he said, I think I can do that. Yes, I think you can too if you make up your mind to do that. Remember, he said, we're going to fly over the village of the Winnebagos. Being that this is a Winnebago story, we just have to have the Winnebagos. They'll be camped in that way. And so when we get there, they will make a lot of noise. They'll beat on hollow logs, and people will shout and scream, try to get your attention. Make up your mind. Keep your mind on what you're doing. Well, he said, well, you better exercise a little bit, so he flapped his arms around, covered with feathers. Lo and behold, he rose up off the ground. A few times, I think it's going to work. So now we all get some sleep, and we're leaving early in the morning. All except the scouts can be on the lookout. So then they calmed down for the night, and of course, Chunkaga, he didn't sleep very much. He was too excited. Once in a while, he'd get up and he'd try it out, and he'd get off the ground. And he said, that's going to be something. So he busied himself with practicing to fly and imagining all kinds of things that's going to happen in the far-off Southland. He's going down there. I suppose, plus that, he was dreaming up some kind of trickery to pull on the geese. And so the geese changed shifts in their watch and so forth, but he'd still get out there. Lo and behold, he'd go up in the air. Sure enough, it's going to work. Even between times, he'd have doubts again, but I wonder if that was really so. Maybe that was an accident. I better try it again. But then finally it was morning. Everybody got up there, all the geese and so forth. There was a lot of honking and quacking and so forth with the ducks. And so they said, now it's time to go. And he says, how do I get started? And so he said, watch your other brothers go. So those that were on the water seemed to flap their wings and run on the top of the water and take off. But he's on land, so that's a little bit different. So those that's on land, why they'd take a run and flap their wings and take right off. So the leader says, now we better get going there, brother. We can't wait too long there. they're waiting for us, and I guess the flock was up circling around and so forth, so then they took off. And Wakchankaga chased right after him, had like that. Instead of flapping his wings, he had to run quite a ways because he's running like a human being. Oh, he must have been a monster of a goose with all that feathers on him and so. So finally he remembered that he's supposed to flap supposedly his wings, so that's what he did, and lo and behold, he was airborne. And so they took off for the upper regions and began to form their formations and fly along. So the leader, once in a while, he'd turn sideways. He said, "You better honk." So he says, "Honk." That's it. So everybody else say, all the others answered him. And so this was fine. Sailing along up there. Come on, honk a little bit there, Let us know that you're enjoying it. So he says, "Honk, honk, honk." And they all answer him. And so they headed south. And he warned him again. He said, "We're coming to Ho Chunk country now. You better keep your mind on what you're doing." But he's a disobedient person, individual. He had a mind of his own. And so he decided to do his own thinking. "Oh, I made it this far," he says. But about the time they come to Ho Chunk town, Winnebago town, why, he was thinking to himself, if they only knew who was up here flying, they would be jealous. And the more he thought about it like that, he said, "I wonder if they know that this is me up here flying." So they got right over town, and he's kind of worried that they wouldn't recognize him. So he kind of swooped down a little bit lower, and so he could be recognized. I guess he got his mind off of keeping those wings flapping along like that, and he lost altitude suddenly and the momentum, and so he hit the ground, and all the women folks came out there they were beating on logs and screaming and shouting, and they said, "Oh, here comes a big goose. We got one down." And they went out there with their hoes and I suppose broomsticks, and if they had brooms then, and start pounding on this big pile of feathers that came down, and they just knocked the feathers off of him. Feathers flew in every direction until he said, "Hey, hey, hey, it's me." And they looked, and it was Wakchankaga, and so they gave him another slacking with the sticks until they chased him out of town. So that ended the story about him trying to go to the Southland with the geese. Because of his disobedient nature, well, then this is what happened to him. He never got further than the Winnebago country. He was there where the great cold was going to catch up to him, and so it is with everyone who disobeys or gets his mind off his goal or whatever he's trying to do. He says, "Well, let that rest a while. I'll do this now." And so he'll never. That means that kind of a person will not reach what he sets out to do.